Hello, everybody. Happy Memorial Day to you. We have a good show for you today. Thank you very much for listening. Really do appreciate you tuning in. We will start the show, though, by, before we get into some Memorial Day content, talking a little bit about the Biden administration and the possible turn we are seeing mostly in media coverage of the administration. And, for example, Chuck Todd declaring, that things may not be going all quite as well as they seem they would in that pretty impressive Biden joint congressional address. Meanwhile, Kamala Harris, his VP, is in trouble for tweeting, "Enjoy the long weekend" on Memorial Day. Does she want to see the dead troops? We will discuss also how to kind of, process, as somebody who, is not a fan of what we do with our military, especially in the post-World War II era. How do I, think about Memorial Day? I've been kind of thinking about this. I've been reading very emotional content from just everyday Americans all across the country about the losses that they've had in their family fighting for this country. And of course, how do you contextualize that with the kind of shitty ways, to say the least, our military has been used over the past few decades. Meanwhile, a very, very interesting situation going on in Texas, where the Democrats are walking out, stopping Republicans sweeping voting restriction access, and Sean Hannity may just have helped save Joy Reid's job at MSNBC. I'll tell you how that happened on the show. All right, let's get into it now, and we start with Chuck Todd and his Beltway media friends are getting a little bit antsy. There's a column here in the soapbox of the New Republic from Ostita Nuevo. Let's get into it. While politicos like to pretend otherwise, most presidential addresses to Congress contain very little that matters. It's very, very true. I think they're probably better just not watching because this is the kind of... I came in as skeptical as anybody about the Biden administration. I was slightly encouraged by that stimulus bill because it was a genuinely big step in the right direction, as far away as we were under Obama and Trump towards what sort of influence the government should be having in people's lives, especially after a crisis like COVID. But then, that speech also was very impressive. But, it's just one of the perils of youth, being attracted by, I hate to say it, but it's true. The charming tones, the charming dulcet tones of Joe Biden. I actually was like, wow, this speech is going to be pretty good. Like if he managed to even put a step, he has to at least give it a good crack now that he said all these things in front of the nation, right? No, again, after the Trump administration, after all this, after what we've seen from the Democratic Party for years, and what we've seen from Joe Biden for years, I still did not learn my lesson. So, yeah, that is pretty disappointing, but yeah, I make it another resolution to never watch those States of the Union ever, because they're stupid and they do not matter, especially when you have a Democratic president. So, yeah, they pretty much capture the public attention for a day or two, generate busy work for journalists, very true, and then they are promptly forgotten about by all except historians, who parse them for meaning long after the administration in question is over. And people are like, oh, was he telegramming his next great move or his next awful move in this speech, They just kind of have their normally, sensibly processed. And the president, they're useful mostly as windows into the upcoming legislative calendar. Viewers typically come away with a general sense of what the president kind of wants to prioritize vaguely. In his April address, President Biden laid out a specific deadline for the passage of a police reform bill. I know Republicans have their own ideas and are engaged in very productive discussions with Democrats in the Senate. That has not happened ever. Since 2010, there have been no probably productive, real, good, positive they've been productive, but they've maybe probably were going in the wrong direction when Democrats and Republicans had discussions in the Senate ever since 2010. But he said, this is kind of funny, we need to work together to find a consensus, but let's get it done next month, the first anniversary of George Floyd's death. So today's obviously May 31st. May 25th was the first anniversary of George Floyd's death, and the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act has not passed. In lieu of a signing ceremony, Biden invited the Floyd family to the White House, where he presumably told them that real progress on the bill is being made. So, we're getting there, guys. It's going to go great. We're really trying hard here. So like how like more depressing can that get, right? But weeks into these bipartisan talks, an end to qualified immunity, the federal doctrine that shields abusive police officers from civil damage in most cases, remains unacceptable to Republicans, and it's entirely possible that they will not reach a passable compromise. And I don't know if they could put that through somehow through reconciliation, but if not, it's going to have to go through regular order, and that is going to be a problem. You know, if there was any kind of serious effort from the Biden administration, I do not know how the first thing you do when you get in there is go after anybody in the Democratic caucus and Senate who stands in the way of getting rid of the filibuster, because they have to realize that's the only way they want to get anything done. You know, you can say, oh, it's not a really good advisable situation, but do you want to govern at all? Do you want to have any interest in being able to pass bills at any point ever? Like, because you're not going to. And once you actually put some effort, and really any logical person, it shouldn't be that hard to prove, if you're really trying to prove it, that Republicans don't want to pass any, like, they're not going to let the Democrats pass anything at all. Like, once that becomes, like, it's the question, and you really don't know. It's 50-50, and that's being generous, what Democrats like Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema, how they're going to answer when they're asked, would you rather govern without the filibuster or do absolutely nothing and keep it? You know, and it's the responsibility of people like Joe Biden to A, realize that, which, you know, he hasn't, I don't think, and B, act on it. And they are not doing either of those two things. So going on here in this piece, he writes, the same can be said about Biden's infrastructure bill. Their transportation secretary, Pete Buttigieg, told the press in April that Biden hoped to see major action in Congress and real progress by Memorial Day. To keep that deadline, negotiators would have to close by Monday a $1 trillion gap between Democrats and Republicans on the overall cost of the package, exactly what it should contain and how it should be financed. It's $1 trillion. Like, they came out with like $1.9 trillion, and the Republicans were like, okay, how about $190 million? Yes, great. That's exactly where we're at. Like, that is the counteroffer. They're not, when you put a counteroffer out like that, you're not ever going to get a deal. Like, that is just not, those are not people who came to play. They're not people who came to reach a compromise or consensus in any way, shape, or form. And people need to realize that. They really do. Fortunately for Democrats in the country, the party can go at it alone through budget reconciliation on infrastructure, and preparations are being made to do so. But the Floyd Act, much like the For the People Act, the bill in the January 6th Commission, gun control legislation, D.C. statehood, immigration reform, and pretty much everything else that's piled up on the docket since the passage of Biden's COVID relief plan, cannot pass without either a substantial amount of Republican support, not going to happen, or an end to the legislative filibuster, which at this point is probably not going to happen. So it's a pretty terrible situation, and those of us who've spent the last several months taking measurements of Biden's place on Mount Rushmore have said so repeatedly. Spent the last several months taking measurements for Biden's place on Mount Rushmore have said so repeatedly. So the dominant storyline, NBC's Chuck Todd, Mark Murray, and Carrie Dam informed us on the Monday Morning Piece, is that his mood from the virus and even the vaccination rate to the fate of Biden's non-COVID related agenda on infrastructure and policing. Now there's a sentence that pretty much announces the fix is in there. This from Chuck Todd here. This is pretty much what Chuck Todd does best, producing shifts in the political discourse by reporting the shifts had already occurred. Kind of similar to the Fox News trick some people are saying. So pretty much ventriloquizing random sects of American groups, or oftentimes actually just special interest groups in general, to put out and make the case, make the play that is what most people are thinking. Like, that is where the beating heart of America lies, and Chuck Todd knows it. It's kind of a joke, but there are only natural micro tremors in the political landscape. It's often implied that only the delicate antenna of political reporters and pundits can detect. Chuck Todd knows where all the bodies are buried, but the dominant storyline of American politics are actually authored in sentences like the above by people like Chuck Todd. You won't find much evidence implying that the electorate is invested in infrastructure negotiations in the Floyd Act, more than of course, the pandemic, the economic recovery, are playing big roles there. Infrastructure could have a little bit of a role in that. They may want to see some taxes on the rich, because we have seen that is a popular policy time and time again. But in the media, attention is earned and money is made when the public perceives motion and change. So the public's opinions really might change now that the entirety of the press is now on the same page as to what the public should be thinking about. So we are seeing a big shift, like all this kind of wave of stories. It's very kind of rare, but also, you got to know when to look for it, which is pretty much you read various news sites. You can see the same story again and again and again. So you have that NBC News story saying that, now the focus is going from the pandemic to the policing and infrastructure. Politico's playbook led yesterday with a reminder that Biden's deadlines have come due. The New York Times is watching as hope for bipartisan deals on Biden's priorities dim. Another NBC News piece pointedly noted that the anniversary of Floyd's death would be a discussion, not a deal. And at CNN, we're told that Biden faces a crunch moment in his presidency. The Biden presidency and top Democrat CNN analyst Stephen Collinson wrote, suddenly face a moment of truth with an audacious nation-changing agenda imperiled by the treacherous political math of divided Washington and stiff resistance by pro-Trump Republicans. And of course, there is actually nothing sudden about any of this. Biden and the Democratic Party are facing the exact same fundamental political situation that you could have seen on January 6th when John Ossoff and Raphael Warnock won their elections, and the Senate became 50-50. So that is when you had the current political landscape of those votes are going to go not just to they're not really the Ossoff and Warnock votes are not really going to matter. It's really just going to be with Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema, the most conservative members of the Senate thing. So that is very, very clear. And so now that they are making this the dominant storyline, what is going to be interesting to see is how it plays out. How do they respond to the push-pull factors and the various interests that are going to be coming in and trying to convince, quote-unquote, people to do things? What is going to be the narrative? Because this, especially with the Democratic base, is going to be very, very telling, because the mainstream media, as we saw in the Democratic primary, the legacy media, people like NBC News, especially MSNBC, have a big amount of influence over the way, the most active parts of the Democratic base think. And if they're suddenly getting pissed at Biden, wondering why he's not doing more, those kind of glasses, those rose-petal glasses, are starting to come off, then it'll be interesting to see how Biden responds to that possible pressure. But, it's very possible that Biden will just not be blamed for it. It's far more likely that Biden will not be blamed for it at all. It's just going to be, what can you do with pesky old Joe Manchin? That is the kind of idea that they're going to be pushing for. Osita writes, so what's next in this new dominant storyline? Well, the infrastructure talks will probably fail, and as far as many Democrats on the Hill are concerned, were never much more than an effort to create a permission structure for Manchin and other moderates to back another partisan reconciliation push. Saying, quote, I think they messaged the hell out of the difference this week, Senate Democratic aide told Axios, and back home next week, market test their umbrage. So pretty much they're saying, we're stepping out from the Democratic Party. Joe Manchin and Sinema are saying this, and then they'll go home and say, how much blowback are we getting? Then there's this Endless Frontier Act, which is a 1,400-page pile of amendments glued together by economic jingoism that stick it to China with about $100 billion in federal tech funding and a crackdown on shark fin soup. It's kind of a mess. The Endless Frontier Act here, which is really about, it's not even a bill about one thing. It's just a bill with so many big things. It's about China, $100 billion in federal tech funding. So, that's something that both sides should have some pretty healthy skepticism of. And a crackdown again on shark fin soup. Some Democratic lawmakers and their aides, Axios' Elena Chirine wrote, suspect that if this bill, which has involved a series of Republicans, can't pass, and the entire mood of the Senate will shift away from comity. But nothing about the bipartisan passage of the Frontiers Act would make the passage of Biden's agenda any easier, because this bill is it's a mess. It's crap. It's like, you put every single item on your shelf in the kitchen into one pot and stirred it, and it's not going to be good. So the press will obviously take kind of a negative view of this, but it's not going to be for, the Biden administration is falling down the job, which they are. It's going to be really a big problem with the fact that, this country is getting so divided. Whatever are we going to do? But there is clear political will, a minority that's exercising control over the majority of people who have been, at least for these 4 years, popularly elected. We'll be back in a minute. Ladies and gentlemen, you are listening to the Spencer Walsh Radio Network, and let me tell you about our lineup. Newsflash is all new Mondays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays now, and that is, of course, our flagship show, but we have plenty of other great offerings for you, including Uncultured, live mixes every Saturday. Perfect way to celebrate or get ready for the Saturday night. Have a good time. Tune in to the Spencer Walsh Radio Network for live broadcasts. And Hidden History is every Thursday now on the Spencer Walsh Radio Network. We got a banger new episode coming for you around midday or so tomorrow. So you have that to look forward to. Please support us. Listen to our podcast wherever. But when you do, please be sure to rate and review us, because that does help get the word out there. I'm sure you know the drill if you listen to podcasts. You know what to do. It's the Spencer Walsh Radio Network. Thanks so much for listening. All right, so we are watching an interesting story about if Kamala Harris, folks, is she not racist? Does she hate the troops? That's what it is. My apologies. The other side's accusations there are being used. So this is the story. This is the controversy here. If you haven't heard, if you're on Instagram, you probably know some like 3 or 4. At least for me, there's like 3 or 4 kids who always post the conservative stuff. And these people were out in full force because Kamala Harris posted May 29th, that was this past Friday, a picture of herself smiling, glamorously to the side there in a headshot, where kind of her famous Kamala auntie laugh with the caption, "Enjoy the long weekend." What? Disgusting. Anyway, you see, I'm making myself get so angry about it right now. Okay, so first of all, this is kind of a tough story because first, on the kind of a joking way, both sides have points. First of all, these pictures with VP Kamala and VP Auntie Kamala and President Uncle Joe, Grandpa Joe more like, with them walking down the hall, smiling every weekend. That is just the most annoying thing in the world. Because, first of all, you have those pictures, and then not only are they kind of weird in and of themselves, but then you have a bunch of comments from people. I don't know if they're bots, I don't know if they're like crazy, but they're like, oh, this is the administration I never knew I wanted. Like, just pictures of like, oh my gosh, Kamala, and she's looking so fly, and Biden is looking so relatable. Woo! Like, that is the general social media reaction to them posting pictures of them walking down the road, or down the hall in the White House, being like, we're here to do some work. But then, of course, that would be better if they're not doing all the stuff we just talked about for the last 15 minutes. So these kind of pictures, these selfie pictures that aren't selfies, of course, they are very, very annoying. So that is fair. But really, they're not mad about the principle of these videos existing. They are mad about the fact that she used the phrase, enjoy the long weekend, which, of course, is not paying sufficient respect to the troops. And really what this is, I think, probably the most ridiculous thing, and is one of the ways that conservatives are obviously so, like, this is where liberals can kind of get back a few points about, the, liberal identity, Starbucks drinking, like cafe hanging outing, avocado toast, brunch, all those buzzwords that conservatives always throw at millennials, or liberals, whatever. Because this is just the most, especially because one of the best things about Trump is they can really show how every single, all the blatant disrespect Trump showed to intelligence community, people like CIA and FBI, and people like he called the troops like suckers, he called them losers, like he did all these things that were like blatantly kind of insulting the troops, was saying, folks, nobody loves the military more than me. How about sending them again to the border wall over Thanksgiving just for a political stunt? Like these are all things that he did that were, if Biden or Obama did them, it is incredibly, it would be game over. Like Republicans would be leading a press conference calling for his impeachment the next day. So that is the best thing, because it reveals how completely fake that all these people, and I'm sure you have a few in your mind in your social media, Instagram feeds that are always posting about how we love Trump, barbecue, and the troops. Like that is like, two of those things are definitely true, but the troops, it's false. It's completely false. It's a complete, of course I'm talking about, for people, because there are plenty of, Trump supporting people that may have served in the military, may have lost someone. Obviously, that is different. But there are a lot of people out there who support Trump and support the military, but say that we have to send them across the side of the world, other side of the world, all the time to bomb every terrorist, every Muslim that we can find. And who cares about their conditions? Who cares about what they're made to do by our government in the name of, the quote-unquote war on terror? There's no accountability for that. There should be no, proper treatment of the VA. Whenever like radical communist, America-hating Bernie Sanders is the only one out there when it comes to, for his entire career, raising funding for veterans, trying to help homeless veterans. He has been like, that is where the real outrage in the situation lies. Is I think from kind of a more left-wing standpoint is not the fact that, Kamala Harris didn't mention the words Memorial Day in her tweet. And of course you can do all these kind of posts that are very, like, to my mind, they're very similar about, the kind of when liberals would get all mad about all these kind of tone related things about, when Trump said that mean thing about Mika Brzezinski or something like that, but then not get mad about him, doing another very egregious thing that kind of slipped under the radar screen. It's very much the similar kind of Kamala derangement syndrome is what conservatives are almost coming down here with. Like, there's no one, like, because on top of this is the best part of it all. Kamala Harris has the exact same policies as any Republican when it comes to military spending, when it comes to the way, like, what policies we should have abroad. She's in lockstep with that and all the kind of conservative notions of the troops and how the troops should be responded to. Like, when it comes to, more social programs, like significant spending for the Veterans Administration, really putting a package, like, because it is so easy to do, to like make a significant economically redistributive policy that would fundamentally end homelessness for veterans, which is a huge problem. And not just homelessness, but the precarious economic situations that veterans are in, some sort of better beneficial kind of GI program, because veterans, they just come back in a way that is, it was better years and years ago, when we had a lot more, when everyone was kind of doing it for World War II. Now, what the military has kind of very unfortunately kind of slipped into is a tool where we can take the most disadvantaged a lot of times. Again, there's people who are, and I'm not saying that there's not people who are like completely into this and they want to go serve, they want to fight for a noble cause. In my opinion, I don't think any of the wars in the United States are, and I do believe that there are, noble causes to fight for, of course, but there are people out there who I have to acknowledge and say, I'm doing this for a noble thing. This is like a perfect, righteous thing. I'm doing it for a good cause that I care deeply about. And, I personally, I say, I respect your choice, respect your sacrifice, but that is not my opinion. There's nothing the United States is doing right now with its military that is, in terms of, foreign interventions, presence in Afghanistan, presence in the Middle East, stuff like that, that is, in my opinion, worth supporting with my presence in the military. But if that's what you want to do, that's what you want to do. I think, personally, I think you're being, like, it's a scam, and I think I would never join it. But if that's what you want to do, that's what you want to do. But really what it is for a increasing amount of people in the military. It is people from the most disadvantaged economic situations. A lot of people white, a lot of people black, girls, boys. It kind of affects everyone equally, kind of funneled into this machine to continue to create all these really manufactured conflicts for really mostly the benefits of the most powerful people, the most people in the weapons industry, defense contractors, all that stuff, to keep that gravy train running. So what they're doing is they're just taking them out, throwing in the machine through for a few years, putting their lives at risk for, whatever the next big terror front or conflict front will be. And then they're taking them back, sending them home, and a lot of them are ending up in awful, awful situations. People, what today's all about, of course, is people who never made it home. The treatment of, the veterans, I think personally, is one of the biggest indications of the quality of a country, just as how we treat our kind of worst among us and the weakest among us. It's also how I think we treat those who have served and those who have sacrificed great many things, including, as we celebrate here on Memorial Day, their lives. So, yeah, I think Kamala Harris's view of our military is problematic just as much as I think all the people who are calling her out for her view of the military are problematic, because in the end of the day, they have the same view. This is all kind of culture war, partisan bull crap. And that is one thing you should know if you're seeing any of that kind of stuff on Twitter or Instagram. All right, let's move on. And we are talking about Texas abortion rights. Very, very interesting there. So let's get into it. From the AP here, the Democrats pulled off a dramatic, abortion rights. Did I just say abortion rights? Voting rights. Democrats pulled off a dramatic last-ditch walkout in the Texas House of Representatives on Sunday night to block one of the most restrictive voting laws in the United States from passing before a midnight deadline. The sudden revolt torpedoed the sweeping measure known as Senate Bill 7, which would have reduced polling hours, empowered poll watchers, and scaled back ways to vote in Texas, which already has some of the nation's strictest voting laws. One of these was you could not transfer 2 or more non-family members to the polls without express registered commission from like a state body. So if you and 3 friends want to drive to the polls to vote, to carpool, you would not be allowed to do that without express permission from the government. Like, that is what was in this bill. Insane. For Democrats, the victory may be fleeting. Republican Governor Greg Abbott, who had declared new voting laws in Texas a priority, quickly announced that he would order lawmakers back to the state capitol for a special session. He did not, however, say when that would happen. We've said for so many years we want more people to participate in our democracy, and it seems that is not the case, said Democratic Representative State Rep Carl Sherman. Less than 24 hours later, the bill seemed all but guaranteed to reach Abbott's desk. The Texas Senate had approved the measure in a vote before sunrise, after the Republicans used a bare-knuckle procedural move to suspend the rules and take up the measure in the middle of the night during the Memorial Day holiday weekend. But as the night wore on in the House, the GOP's chances wobbled. About 2 hours before the midnight deadline, Democrats began filing out of the chamber in greater and greater numbers, denying the Republicans the quorum necessary to hold the final vote. The walkout handed Republicans a rare defeat in the Texas Capitol, where they control every lever of power and wield the overwhelming majorities in both House and Senate. State Rep Chris Turner, the House Democratic leader, sent a text message to members of his own caucus at 10:35 p.m. telling them to leave the chamber. "We killed that bill," he said. Republicans showed restraint in criticizing Democrats for the move. "I'm disappointed that some members have decided to break quorum," Republican State Rep Briscoe Cain said, who carried the bill in the House. If you want to, I don't know if it's a great podcast episode to understand the insane nature of the Texas legislature. It's Austin Shitty Limits, I believe, is the name of the episode from Chapo Trap House, where they talk to Brian Garr, who's kind of covering that area. But his name certainly sounds familiar as one of the characters in that narrative on that podcast. But he showed restraints, so good for him. We all know what that meant. I understand why they're doing it, but we took an oath to Texans that we would be here to do our jobs. And that job is make sure that you can't vote us out again if you don't like us. The move was reminiscent of 2003 when outnumbered Democrats twice broke quorum to stop Republican efforts to redraw voting maps. House Democrats first left the state en masse for Ardmore, Oklahoma, only to return several days later. Senate Democrats delayed a special session that summer by going as a group to Albuquerque, New Mexico for several weeks. Ultimately, neither effort worked as the Democrats eventually returned to the Capitol and the Republicans passed the bill. And I honestly think, at this point, it's probably going to happen where one of them just goes back because they break or whatever, or a certain amount of them necessary to hold the vote go back because they break. But, I mean, obviously, you know what I think about this. Like, stay out. Like, this is ridiculous. Why would you ever go back? Texas is pretty much the last big battleground in the GOP's nationwide effort to tighten voting rights laws. Georgia and Florida have been the last two. And President Biden on Saturday unfavorably compared Texas's bill to election changes in those states as an assault on democracy. We'll keep you posted on that. But a very interesting story here coming out of the media world. Sean Hannity, this is in the Wrap, said an NBC News executive credited him for keeping Joy Reid in 2018 on the air after the MSNBC host faced fallout from her old blog post. Hannity's comments arose Monday night when he was interviewing Rick Santorum about his recent ouster from CNN, saying, quote, "I don't believe in boycotts. I never will." Saying, quote, "When Joy Reid was in trouble, I was called by an NBC executive that said, 'Your public comments played a big role in us being able to keep her,' meaning her job. She wrote me a nice note. I said, people can make mistakes and move on, but not anymore." So pretty much what she did was a really ridiculous situation because she said some bad things in her old blog posts that were pretty homophobic, insulting to, I believe, a representative who was gay, and just pretty much said a lot of things. So, yeah, it was criticized to mock homophobic language, mocking former Governor Charlie Crist. She said, quote, "This note is my apology to all who are disappointed by the content of the blogs I wrote a decade ago, for which my choice of words and tone have been legitimately criticized. As a writer, I pride myself on a facility with language and economy of words, or at least some wisdom in the selection. However, that clearly has not been the case." But one of the strange things about it, one of the weird things about it, was that for the longest time, she complained that someone had hacked those blog posts and fake wrote them. These were they were found in the Internet Archive. So pretty much the idea is that someone there hacked the Internet Archive to implant Joy Reid. I don't know exactly how they would do it, but it was an absolutely ridiculous statement, considering that, yes, she clearly made those posts. I mean, moving on from it is one thing. Everyone deserves a second chance. That's always a good principle to live by, and I think you got to be consistent in that. Even though when it's people you don't like someone like Joy Reid. But at the end of the day, I think it's clear to say that her lying about that was insane. And it's very interesting, though, to see that note of solidarity that all cable news hosts seem to have when defending each other's professional positions. That's all we have for you today. Thank you so much for listening. This has been Newsflash.